Welcome, everyone, to today's podcast, The Engineer Whisperer Transitions into a Director Role. I am so excited to have you here. And today, my guest is Casey. Casey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. So I work in the food industry. Specifically, I'm an executive in the food industry. And the area of the food industry I work in is a discipline known as food science. So not many people are familiar with this discipline, but it's a combination of different kinds of science. So chemistry, biology, physics, as it applies to the manufacture of food to produce it, whether from the fields to the fork, through all the dimensions of nutrition, safety, regulatory approval, distribution, et cetera. I've been in this line of work for about 25, 30 years now.
Wow, super amazing. Well, we're here to talk about your transition from a leader of individual contributors into a leader of leaders. So before we start, let me ask you this question. Was this something that someone invited you into this role, or was this always part of your career development plan?
You know, I think it evolved to eventually become my plan. You know, within the discipline of food science, most large organizations have two career ladders. They have the technical ladder and they have sort of the people and programs management ladder. And while, you know, I have been loving science since I was a child, I was always called to be a little more interdisciplinary in what I did, and that I liked solving problems a little more cross-functionally. I began to value, especially I appreciated in my 20s, very much so the human element. So of those two paths, the technical path versus the more manager style path, I ultimately gravitated to the management side. But to take a few steps back and ask your question, was it something that was kind of pushed on me, or was I, kind of invited? I think the key thing that I did, I was very fortunate to work for large multinational organizations, which have, they're reasonably sophisticated in developing their managers, having career growth programs, et cetera.
Yes.
And one of the most simple things you can do when you're in that kind of environment is to put your hand up and declare what you'd like to do. And you should be not ashamed to say, like, that you don't have all the details, that you don't know how to get there, that even you don't know what it fully means, but to express, your willingness and desire to move toward a goal. Because again, in that kind of environment where you can have a lot of advocates at the senior level, you can have, whether it's your own frontline manager or people from other departments, they can be your guide, but they can't do it if they don't know where you want to go. So it's not just kind of taking the personal decision, it's also making the declaration that you want to get there, and then you attract people to help you along that way.
I see. So at some point, that's what I'm hearing. At some point, you put up your hand and say, yeah, I would like to be a leader of leaders.
Exactly.
There's an opportunity. And then maybe the invitation came later,
Correct.
came after saying,
Right.
oh,
And
yeah.
some of these things take years actually to work their way out, especially in situations that are maybe an incumbent in a position that you might be right for.
Yeah.
People may recognize, hey, this guy's a great fit for this, but there's certain critical experiences, maybe certain functional skill sets, but also emotional intelligence, certain other kinds of experiences that they need to grow in first before we can put them there. But we understand, and we can begin to shape the situation for them. So yeah, 2-3 years later, they're ready.
So wait, you're saying, is this what happened to you, or is that what you're doing now? So
Well, I would say, in my career, looking back over a few decades, I recognize where what I thought was just somebody giving me something to do was someone, a very smart and caring manager, opening a door and creating an opportunity, basically giving me a challenge, but it was an opportunity to grow in a way in which, I hadn't yet fully utilized that strength or that capability. And it set me up years later to have those kinds of experiences.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about your transition.
Mhm.
What came easy to you, if anything?
Well, I think, what came easy was my first real so moving in that transition from the manager to the director level. Um, my experience is typically, kind of manager. Sometimes you're managing some people or programs, but it's relatively confined within a few different elements. And as you move up in leadership, and typically this happens at the director level, have to become, across many more different dimensions of responsibility. Like, maybe you were responsible for only quality, but now you have responsibilities across supply chain, strategic planning, et cetera. What was very easy for me in my first director role was it was within the company I was working for and with the same boss. So um, when people go through transitions, there are certain things that they change in their career, and then there's certain things that stay the same. So when you can manage an environment where I have, I'm working. I'm still responsible for all the original disciplines that I was working for previously. We've
Mm-hmm.
added 2 or 3 additional things, but you still had, in my case, I still had the same manager who could, we're very much on the same wavelength, and who could be a very good guide as I take on these new responsibilities, who
Yeah.
could make it very clear for me. A lot of some of my other transitions later in my career weren't quite as smooth, but I think, being able to have that, and it's not always at the manager level. Sometimes it's as simple as, you're still in the same company with the same, where your
Yes.
resource network is the same. You're in the same location where, hey, listen, maybe you're working with a different team, but you still have a lot of the other resources that were available to you geographically are still proximal to you. So being able to have certain things that you can keep the same is always going to make those transitions. They're never easy, but call them less painful.
Oh, okay. So I hear that y- you you really appreciate your environment and then the people resources in your environment,
Mhm.
and then you lean into that when you have a transition, when you can. I
When you
Yes.
can, when you can.
Now, what was challenging for you? Or what were some of your challenges?
In that first transition, the big thing I took on was the scope of my role. Um, Went from one where my accountabilities were entirely contained to North America. So I was responsible for activities associated in the US and Canada. And then the scope of my role came to include things at a global level. So again, this was when I
Oh,
was working for a large multinational organization. And, there was 2 things. So now I've got a certain level of accountability for at the time Russia, Brazil, Argentina, France, the UK, where we had particular activities that were critical to company deliverables. And I've got to, I had a modest network worldwide, but certainly not at that level. But I've got to be able to activate people in these regions for certain things. And in that particular case, it's not just about the scope of the responsibility. One of the things that's always important in terms of getting things done is certain power dynamics. So these are indirect relationships where, I'm not necessarily in a position of power to push people to do things the way their frontline manager is. But I needed to use other elements of political influence to drive change in these markets. And that challenge is amplified again when you're still sort of building the network across, global partnerships, shall we say.
yeah. Tell me more. How did you figure that out? How to learn
Um,
that? How to do it?
well, again, where I credit a lot of my success to some of the people, who were who put me in the position, also recognize that I would be challenged and they were to support me. So that was both, again, I mentioned my frontline manager, also some colleagues I had gotten to know very well who were in more central roles in other business units around the world, who are able to help nurture the relationships. I think one of the things that people when people take on more responsibility or they take on a new role, they tend to focus very much on what are the key measurable outputs? What are the functional skills that I need in this role? And I don't want to dismiss either of those things, but I think that, what makes the world go is human relationships. And strong interpersonal relationships, especially as I described in a situation where you need to politically influence, are so critical. So I was very fortunate to have some guidance from people who could, help me quickly, probably more quickly than I could have on my own, build a lot of those interpersonal relationships around the world. And I feel that, being able to work through challenges when you've got a reasonably well-established and a reasonably strong relationship, it's going to be a lot easier, especially where you need to challenge and push back on things. Those kind of conversations can go south really quickly if you don't have that right kind of personal working relationship.
So Casey, I'm curious, are you referring to finding commonalities even though you have different cultures, different traditions, different upbringings, different language, you live in different places,
Yeah,
or
I
looking
mean,
for
I
differences?
certainly, yeah, I certainly don't want to dismiss the cultural piece in that. At the same time, you
What made
know,
the difference for you? What was something that you were guided to learn and to pay attention to and focus as you were building? Because it's one thing, and I'm asking because I'm curious myself, and I think my audience would be too. It's one thing to build a strong working relationship with the team that you are with, in a say, let's say you are present with,
Mhm.
and maybe at the same location as well. But you're talking global, and you mentioned a few countries and continents. So
Yeah.
there are all these other variables that come in. So how did you do that?
Well, I think one of the things where I was ultimately able to be successful in those more challenging situations is to understand the person who I'm working with. What are some of their drivers and their why? Because oftentimes what happens is we compartmentalize the discussion or the negotiation is happening between the two people. And oftentimes it doesn't have a lot to do with it, because again, I'm being motivated by certain responsibilities, other things I've taken on outside of that conversation. And you really need to understand what are the key drivers and the key motivations for that person, because chances are, it's something that's not necessarily directly related to what you want. For example, what are, in what business cadence and by what metrics do they introduce new products in Australia? Again, the nature of the work I was doing was dependent upon innovating and renovating new products into the consumer marketplace for food products for consumers to eat. And if I don't begin to understand, the cadence at which they're working, what are the key business drivers, I can't even begin to accurately predict, the timeline for when we can impact change. And so it's not really about, hey, listen, what are the tools you're going to use? What are the Okay, that's the output. You really need to understand what are the inputs, what are the drivers, what are the things that this person is sometimes a prisoner to. Because once you can get to those things, then you can also work towards solutions that are also more symbiotic to both of you.
So the inputs that they have, their inputs, what
Correct.
are their
Correct.
inputs, not bring your inputs and then
Yeah.
almost, try to, hey, my input should be your inputs. So it's yeah. Yeah, no, I love that point because we forget that by discovering what matters to others, it's not that we forget what matters to us. It's that both. It's not a
Mhm.
neither or game. It's a both. Now, in this process, I'm curious, while you discovered other people's inputs and drivers, were you able to also share your inputs and your drivers? And how did you do that?
Well, another thing that I think, again, and these are the kind of things, where you have to build the relationship first. But I think this is something very critical from a leadership perspective is, once you have a certain level of credibility, once you have a certain level of rapport, I actually think that sharing vulnerability is very important. And I think, especially as a man, some people are very hesitant to do that, and that they feel that this is an expression of weakness, where you're supposed to be the driver. And, I understand that from just sort of the animalistic side of being humans. But the bottom line is that you can very effectively share what your needs are if you are willing to express sort of your doubts and your fears as well along with them. And I think that you can also win people to your cause in a more effective and in a manner in which they are much more compelled to support you if you were willing to be vulnerable with them about what they're working on. I'm not saying you gotta break out crying or anything, but being willing to express, sometimes your fears, you express when you don't know the way, those kind of things, they don't make you seem weak. They compel people to work with you, because that what you're actually doing is offering them, you can be the part of what helps me get through the piece that I can't do on my own. So
Yeah.
I very strongly encourage people to, as a part of building that relationship, and to make it and activate it into something that can be very effective, is at certain points, to be vulnerable, with the people you're working with.
I think that goes back to what you said, the raising the hand. So in a way, you have to, by expressing what you want, what you're challenged with, what's going on with you
Mhm.
overall, you give people almost an update of what's going on with you, so that when you do raise your hand and you want help, it's not a surprise. It's oh yeah, okay, yes, mentally preparing someone else to help you, because we all want to help those who raise their hand. And, it's just who we are. It's a natural thing for us humans to pull somebody up when they're down, to cheer someone up when they're sad. So
Mhm.
yes. Well, thanks for sharing. You said something that I want to just double click on. Is you said after there's a certain amount of agency, certain amount of trust.
Mhm.
How do you know what that is? What's that certain amount? I
Oh,
mean, I'm sure you have experience, so how did you build that? I don't know, fifth sense.
trust is it's a great word, but it's a very personal word. I can share with you, Andrea, I'm someone who probably gives trust more easily than other people. I think people's level and willingness to engage in trust, I think, so in some ways, sometimes a lot of us are defined by our traumas, right? And people who have had trust used against them, people who have been
Yes.
betrayed, whether it's in your personal life or politically in your career,
Yeah.
those people very understandably will struggle to build trust, and I don't pretend that I haven't had my trust abused, both again personally and professionally. But I've kind of made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let those traumas define who I am, and that I'm a person who by nature has given trust more easily, and I'm gonna, you know, hold myself to that personal value. But again, I've answered your question in the context of what it means for me. My advice to your listeners would be is that you have to do it based on how you feel, and what's right for you. At the same time, the point you double clicked on just a second ago, Andrea, again, it's about putting out your hand. It's about kind of being that self advocate. It's also it's an element of taking a chance, right?
Yeah.
Where you're you know, fortune favors the bold, right? Is that, you know, if
Yeah.
you you never read the autobiography of somebody who just followed the rules and, you know, didn't shake things up. You know, you have to be willing at some point to
Yeah.
dance. And I don't want to, you know, again, I don't want to be encouraging people to be too far away from who they are. But you know, I believe that, you know, again, you have to get comfortable with occasionally being somewhat uncomfortable. So again, it's a very personal question, but you can't allow it to be something that holds you back too much for too long.
Well, you strike me as someone who has done the work to, as I say, to feel, to allow yourself to feel. I mean, you brought in the trauma and that awareness that you have it, others have it. I believe we all have it, and uh,
Mhm,
uh, it's part of life because pain is part of life.
mhm.
So, um, I'm curious, what's a mindset shift that you have worked on, or maybe you're working on right now, to that helped you to grow, or you're working on to continue your growth?
Well, you know, just you mentioned kind of how I came to this mindset. I mean, one of the things, it's a little different than what we're talking about today, but you know, maybe if I'll just pause for a second and mention something else in my career that I thought was incredibly pivotal and that I myself would not have come to my own conclusions. You know, I was very fortunate, again, working at a large multinational company with a lot of internal resources to at one point have been assigned a career coach. And, you know, the idea, you know, sometimes people hear like, oh, you're going to have someone mentor you and stuff. And, you know, in certain HR programs, it's all about, you know, you're having problems. I mean, everyone made very clear to me, this is not, no, this is about helping you to unlock your potential
Yeah.
because you have these level of blind spots. And, you know, I'm reflecting on this point because of one thing you just said, Andrea, about the ability to use emotions.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, growing up as someone who was very focused on the science, very pragmatic, very objective, um, uh, in these sessions over the course of time, so like they're like, you realize like what an emotional person you are, and you're not acknowledging it. It's not about you're telling the world, you know, you're sharing, and but you don't actually acknowledge it yourself.
Yes.
And you know, once you know, it's like just someone just came along and just held a mirror right right up to me and showed me, and you know, you just can't see the piece of food on your face. You know, and once they did that, it really caused a mindset shift, like you were saying, and that, you know, it was an acceptance of a little bit of this is who I am, and this is not saying it's a superpower, but it's an ability that I haven't fostered. And you're always looking to lean into your strengths, and this is clearly
Mhm.
a strength I hadn't leaned into.
Yeah.
You know, and from that point forward, I mean, this is probably, you know, certainly probably more than 7, 8 years ago, but probably not quite 10. You know, it's been, you know, I feel that this was really one of the real catalysts to my career, you know, especially as I've defined earlier, you know, I mentioned you know, the scientific and the technical part of my job is very, very important, but I've embraced all these other kind of responsibilities,
Yes.
and being able to tap into this, you know, I feel that it's also allowed me to think and embrace the emotional intelligence part of my role as well.
Thank you for saying that. I think that that is not shared often, that side that it it's not that you have to let go of your scientific background and everything you learned, or your as an engineer, your engineering background and who you
Mm,
are as an engineer. And now you have to switch and, I don't know, be someone else and, bring feelings in. No, it's understanding how to use both, to understand that in order to be full, to be whole, there are two parts to us. I mean, even in the yin yang, I'm thinking about, the Asian
mhm,
culture,
mhm.
there's the dark and the light, and it's everywhere around us in nature. So, um, really sitting down and giving ourselves the opportunity to reflect what our dark and light sides are as a human being, and then to decide what we bring into our leadership, it will benefit the leader tremendously, it will benefit the team tremendously, and then the side effects will be benefiting the whole company.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, thanks very much for sharing and bringing that in here, because you talk about communication, and I'm a big believer that part of the communication is the noticing the feelings,
Mhm.
that noticing when it's not a social communication, it's not a practical, somebody is not in front of me to solve their problems or to, have fun with them. That's the social aspect, but they want me to meet them where they are right now, and that most of the time that is emotionally where they are right now, as you said, in fear or in confidence, in sadness or in joy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's so many times it's really, especially, when those kinds of situations you describe, they're usually in the context of problems. Um, there's so much of that it's not about solving the problem. It's
Yes.
about hearing and understanding what that emotion is.
Yes.
And, what is the glide path this person, sometimes people just, sometimes you get together, we just need to bitch. We don't have to figure out the problem. We just
Yeah, we just
really
need to vent.
we've
Yes,
got all
yes.
this poison in, and we've got to find a
Yeah,
healthy
just
way
need
and
to
productive way to get it out.
release.
Even when it's not just the bitching, when it's things like fears and doubts and stuff, you know, it's only in the movies that there's the problem. The guy gets up, he makes the speech, everybody cheers, and it's all fixed. That never happens. I mean, problems resolve over time. People changing their mind is an incredibly slow and very private process.
Oh yeah.
You're not going to sit down with it's usually just what's wrong and how can I be of service? And we'll get to the problem once we figure out that first part, which is really the important part.
Yes, yes. I mean, I can just imagine, I mean, having a boss who's trying to change my mind when I'm emotionally unavailable. I think that's one of the worst, worst bosses that anybody can want.
Hmm.
No, no, that no, we don't want that. Well, Casey, was there something that surprised you in your transition into this role?
In that particular role, what I probably and I think that was just, again, this is probably something that in some ways I knew all along, and I probably just it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but maybe it's an acknowledgement. It was maybe the first time that I acknowledged it.
Okay.
And that is, and again, I feel like a lot of the inputs I'm giving you today, Andrea, are kind of based on working at a big company, which is ironic because actually the last 3-4 years I've been working at,
Well,
very small starting up companies, but
you
regardless.
can give me both.
Well,
We don't have to choose.
but I think, I'd like to kind of keep the theme the same for your
Sure.
listeners in that, what I think, and again, this can be some ways company and culture specific, but that the criteria for success, right? We were talking about some of the metrics sometimes that you're measured by,
Mhm.
um, that is a moving target 100% of the time. In that, you know, again, when you're kind of historically have very pragmatic, very objective ways of looking at things, which includes measuring success, you think, okay, here's my target. I'm going to hit it square, and you pull
Uh-huh.
back the arrow and you shoot, and the target's nowhere to be found. In that there's this evolution, and sometimes it has to do with external forces to your organization. Sometimes it's management. They got up on the wrong side of the bed that morning. Well, it doesn't really matter. But the point is that your criteria for success is going to shift. Unlike, again, when you are oftentimes lower from a leadership perspective, you've got these filters of management that is constantly reframing them and lining them up for you. When you are management, you're the one who's digesting that change and having to translate it down the organization.
Yeah.
So, you need to be, and no one, again, no one's often going to give you that input that the metrics for success have changed. It's rather at some point things aren't going to get done, or there's going to be certain levels of dissatisfaction, other kinds of mechanisms that will let you know.
Yeah.
But you are now accountable uh, for whatever the criteria is, and chances are it's going to be different the day after you took the job than the day you took the job.
So Casey, I'm so curious. How did you manage through that? How did you work through that for yourself to keep your sanity and
Well, my my experience is not unique in that I didn't do as great a job the first couple times. And did that mean that you got bit? Did I have? I mean, it's progress isn't a straight line forward, right? It's multiple steps back, and
yeah.
that is a very specific example of times that I took steps back. And it goes both ways too. I'm describing it a little bit in the way of not reacting to the changes that need to be made. And I don't want to dismiss that you can make the opposite
Opposite.
mistake. You
Mhm.
overcorrect.
Yes, yes.
It's something, again, that it's the nature, I think, of well-run management, is when you are constantly processing and activating those filters and making it seamless into your team, right? Is that, when there's, not every shift is a whole change in strategy. There's sometimes many different small changes in scope, but
Yes.
to be able to effectively communicate that both mechanistically wise, but also culturally within the organization, where
Yeah.
change is seen as it's an opportunity to do better, not as like management doesn't know what they're doing. But
Mm-hmm.
but to
Yeah.
build it out in that way,
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
that was my first experience going through it, but it's something now, it's probably hardwired into my DNA at this point in time.
So what I'm hearing, it's a little bit of acknowledging that we all gonna fail. And when you get at that, when you're gonna be in that role, there's gonna be these moments where you're just gonna fail at the target shooting, or I guess, yeah, even
Yeah,
even looking at the target, because
absolutely.
the target already
Absolutely.
has moved. And then to change, pivot your mindset into, well, this is part of the role. The target will change and it's out of my control. What's in my control is my response and my communication and my feelings and how I take that on, and not let my team to freak out. And so that part is what I can control and I can be aware of, versus the, yeah, kind of creating chaos, or
Mhm.
creating more chaos than needs to be as a leader.
Filtering the ambiguity.
Yes. I had a boss like that. And once he moved on, no, I moved on, sorry. Once I moved on and joined another team, our senior was not very good at filtering. And that's when I realized, once I missed my old boss, I realized, oh, that's what he was doing. We didn't,
Mhm.
because we didn't get a lot of scrum, as we said. um, we were protected, and we didn't even know that we were protected until I experienced the other side,
Mhm.
and I appreciated him even more, um, because it was awesome. That protection is so awesome when you're further down. So thanks very much for doing it. And developing that skill. I hope that you're teaching others to do the same, because it's so beneficial.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and as you said earlier in this, it's about creating leaders and, being able to give people that environment where they can bring their best self to work, where they can learn, they can experiment, et cetera. A big part of that is creating that right environment where they can still have those elements of being challenged and, managing minor parts of the ambiguity. But if it's washing over them like a wave in the ocean, then it's like drinking from the fire hose, too much, too fast. And
Yeah.
it's harder to foster, harder to foster growth and human potential in that way.
Yeah. And thank you for also saying it, because I think that there's also, just given my example, that those who haven't been in this role yet, they're the individual contributors. It's easy to blame management for the change and for, oh, the target moved again. Like the management did this intentionally. And I want to shine the light, and hopefully somebody will listen and take away that no, it's not intentional, and to create some empathy and compassion between management and the individual contributors as well, so that that will foster some better communication and relationships.
For certain. And, I mean, I'm just reminded as you're putting it that way, being willing to do these things, and even when you do them at a incredibly high level, the thing people should know is it's a relatively thankless job, right? Because again, from a leadership perspective, what you shouldn't share is, I had to do these, 2, 3 things so we wouldn't have layoffs. People don't want to hear that kind of message. Instead, they're only going to have this level of the output where you've managed this all down to this tiny little piece. Then that, again, that's all that people have available to them. And it's not like they're going to thank you for that. Probably you have to know that you're doing the right thing. You have to know and understand how much you're setting them up for success. But it's not a thank you kind of action. It's hard, and it's not the kind of thing that, again, people are going to understand, to appreciate.
Well, that is why you find people who you can thank, or who you can talk with and share it with. You mentioned your coach, so that would be one, or maybe some other directors. So same level or same company or outside community or professional communities. I think those are so beneficial in this case, because we do want to be recognized. Well, not as a strike my ego, but to talk through it, and to give us ourselves a chance to recognize ourselves, that we did the thing that aligns with our mission, with the values that we said that we're gonna live by, and hopefully aligns with the values of the company. So just, I think those moments are also important as a leader, to remind us why why we do what we do. And if you don't get a thank you over here, find it somewhere else.
Having that great network, I agree with you very much, Andrea. Having that network of strong supporters, whether they're internal, external, or just your friends on a Friday night, it is very important, and very therapeutic as well.
Yes. Okay, see, as we're coming to an end, I'm curious, what transition are you going through currently?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of my career working for reasonably large organizations. So, companies that are measured in the tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. The last 3+ years, I've been working for a smaller startup, and part of that was driven by, I was very motivated by the ability to make an impact, and that's across all dimensions, obviously, to shape the strategy of a company, to drive its financial results, to have as much say as I possibly can in shaping the culture and the organization, et cetera. So, because of that, I took a decision a number of years ago to move to smaller organizations where I could be more agile, where I could be out of my comfort zone. And you take those kinds of decisions knowing that you don't know what you don't know. And, I described earlier how, there's some of these, systems and governance that exist in a large company. It's this great resource, et cetera. But you also, again, when you have it, you don't recognize it's consciously and cultivated. And now you have to build everything from scratch. Just the things that you took for granted are now multi-month endeavors to build and to create, and you have to be collaborative to do it. So, the transition now is really building out the organization, building out the company, where, again, I was tens of billions, and now I'm in tens of millions. We had 25 plus 30 people, and, now we've got a half dozen in a few different places. So it's very challenging in terms of, again, how I take the skills, be they functional skills, be they leadership skills that I've acquired previously, reapply them from a problem solving perspective. How I can be decisive and action oriented in a situation where I haven't necessarily been there. There's a lot of, what people call experience is oftentimes a form of pattern recognition, right?
Yes.
Like, I was in this situation before, these were the inputs, and it's
Yes.
not exactly the same as that time 3 years ago, but I can probably recreate this stuff and
Yes.
replicate success. I don't have a lot of those kind of opportunities where, maybe there's, instead of there being 4 or 5 common elements that you would normally draw from, there's one and a half. So I'm doing a lot of building, and that is, again, it's what I wanted to do, and it gives me a lot of excitement. I've mentioned a few times the ability to navigate ambiguity here earlier. So doing that on on a very daily basis, which again gives me a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. But trying to do it all in a manner that, as I grow and scale a company, I can also grow and scale the people with it. So I'm very blessed that I do have very good people as a part of my team. Again, when you have a smaller company, you tend to skew a little young because, you tend to get the younger people who are a little more ambitious, willing to take a risk.
Hmm.
So, for me, it's exciting because you have a lot of people who are very ambitious. Um, it's also a little challenging because they're very ambitious.
Yeah,
And
well, I thought you were gonna say that.
they want to grow. They want to, they're here, they're taking a chance because they have all this ambition, and they see this as
Yes.
the way to get there. So you've still got to, I think, when we first started, we were talking about how you put your hand up and you make a declaration, and 2, 3 years later, you're set up for it. These people are more ambitious than that. They want it in,
Not 2, 3 years. Yes.
yeah. Sometimes weeks or months. So it is challenging, but it's a fun challenge. And again, part of the burden I bear, and it's a good one in this, is to find to make sure I'm giving all the right outlets for that energy and for that ambition, and that I'm creating a symbiotic mission between their ambition and the ambition of the company,
Mm-hmm.
allowing the
Yeah.
two things to thrive together, because in the end, that's going to set everyone up for success, both in this current endeavor, but these are, again, young people who are going to prosper in their career, also set them up for the long term, because, just the skill sets, again, beyond just their functional know-how, is going to be so broad and dynamic. They're going to be certainly more advanced in their careers when they reach my age, that's for certain.
Well, one, it sounds like you're having so much fun. Like you're at the right place at the right time by choice. So I
Mhm.
love it. I love it when that combo is created. And that you are also really appreciating all these people around you because they are creating the growth for you. So first the challenges and maybe the painful challenges,
Mhm.
but then the growth. And I love your mindset, how you approach it. So I think overall it's so much fun. I mean, to say what you said, that I'm building the people up and I'm building the company up. I mean, to have that opportunity in in a collaborative way and to have it at the same time, I think a lot of people, a lot of leaders would be like, yeah, I would love to experience that. So you're in it, and you're doing it. So I want to recognize your bravery and courage and confidence to do that. That's so cool.
Thank you very much.
Well, on that note, I also would like to give you the mic to close us out. What would you like to leave us with today?
Oh, goodness. I think just for a closing thought, I think it's gonna be a little piece of advice that someone gave me once upon a time,
Sure.
where I was very stressed about work and I was very stressed about my job. Um, and they didn't give me a metaphorical slap and actually reach out. But kind of, snap me back into it. And they said the thing you have to understand is that this is a game. Waving around at the office area and the people and the management. Like,
Yeah.
this is a game. Okay. This isn't the things you think it is. It's a game. And until you start treating it like that, and until you start playing it like a game, you're always going to be held back by yourself. And again, this was like a little something somebody said to me one time that probably thought about 5,000 times between. In fact, I know for a fact I sent an email to a colleague earlier today, and I even wrote that in the email just because it was so powerful, right? In that
Sure.
if you don't understand or don't think about it in that way, there's going to be elements of yourself and your personality, whether it's your blind spots or whatever it is that holds you back.
Mhm.
But when you're willing to look at coming to work and treating it like a game, and I recognize some people work in toxic or hostile work environments. I mean, my advice is still the same. That kind of mindset, by its nature, is just going to foster everything you do to have the opportunity to be under a growth mindset. So just something, again, that very powerful advice was given to me once that would like to leave you and your listeners with.
Thank you. Thank you, Casey. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for sharing a lot today. And thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Been a pleasure to be with you.